Public relations professionals are usually not targeting the mass audience of people who live in the United States. They're often thinking about different segments of the population for their messages, and these segments may be very different from one another because of the diversity that we have in this country. So how do we reach and connect with diverse audiences? One thing to be aware of is the fragmentation of media in this country. So if we think about television, we have many different television networks. We have many cable stations. We have streaming services. Radio, we have many different radio stations. We have satellite radio. We have podcasts. We have lots of different kinds of newspapers, whether regional or local or national, and many magazines in this country. The second thing to think about is market segmentation. So within the population of the United States is segmented into different markets of people, and we will talk about some of those potential markets. Public relations professionals must research demographics and lifestyle preferences to create these market segments for their campaigns. And each segment of an audience calls for different strategies. So if you think you want to target young women, that's going to call for a different strategy than older men, for example. So what do we know about today's audiences within the United States? Diversity is the most significant aspect of the mass audience or the general public in the United States. The differences can be found among people who have they're from different geographical locations, their race and ethnicity, their gender, their generation or age that they belong to, socioeconomic status, etc. There are some audiences that are considered pre-packaged publics. They are very easy to identify and reach. So, for example, if you have people who donate to your charitable organization, they're kind of like a pre-packaged public, but they can still be very different from one another. But at least you can identify them because they're all donors that are on your list, and they're easy to reach because you usually have their email addresses. The audiences are segmented and intersecting. And even when we segment out an audience, so like I mentioned before, young women are going to be very different depending on many of those other factors that I just mentioned. So just keep in mind that even when we do a market segment, that the members of that segment can still be very diverse. And then, of course, intersecting where members, you're not just in one market segment, you're in many market segments. Online audiences are also very demanding. So you, as a PR professional, you would want to think about what are the audience trends for online and social media within that market that I'm trying to target. A couple other points are that people like visual messages, and they also like getting timely updates and responses from social media platforms. So, if something's going on with a brand, we're often like looking at their content, and we expect there to be some kind of an update there on social media. Targeting key audiences requires strategy. The first thing you want to do is identify, segment, and define the characteristics of an audience. And then you will develop and deliver the messages to them. And so I found a couple of consumer profiles that you can look at here. And so often what we do is develop these brand personas. And if we're a business travel company, you can see the example of the woman there, her demographics, or the demographics of this segment, psychographics, challenges, and so on. If you're an athletic shoe company, you might have a brand persona that matches up with this young man here. Let's talk about age group audiences. Age group audiences have experienced the same major events, economic and political climate, social and cultural trends, and tech developments at a certain age. We'll start by talking about Gen Z, the youth market. Even though some Gen Zers are well into their 20s, this audience is the most ethnically diverse in our country. They are voracious consumers of digital media. They are true digital natives, having technology from the time they were born, and they are tech savvy. So when you are targeting Gen Z, you want to think about messages that are short, visual, easily shared. You would want to encourage Gen Z to create content, and celebrity endorsements work really well with this age group. Moving on to millennials, they also have a lot of ethnic diversity, and they are also heavy users of social media. The older millennials experienced the recession in the late 2000s, like around 2008. And so that, led to some economic problems for them, caused them to boomerang back home. So anything that happens during your lifetime can have an impact on you for a very long time. They are the largest generation in history. They value social responsibility, diversity, pursuing happiness. And so the messages for millennials can focus on their interests in social responsibility, environmental sustainability, and the organization taking a stand on social issues. Moving on, let's talk about Gen X. I'm a proud member of Gen X. We were raised in a time of economic uncertainty. The 70s weren't great. When I came out of college in the early 90s, they said that was the worst job market in a very long time. The early 2000s were what was called the dot bomb time, where a lot of .com companies just went bust. They're kind of down on Gen X in this book, saying we're cynics, we're pessimists, we lack risk taking. And the textbook doesn't even really care to mention much detail about how to target Gen X. We'll move on and talk about baby boomers. The baby boomers, they're post-World War II babies. They enjoyed the advantages as the international stature of the United States grew after World War II. They tend to be skeptical, discerning, question authority. They have a strong position on social issues. The older baby boomers had to deal with the turmoil of the Vietnam era, where they may have been drafted or just dealing with those feelings during that time. They did have a higher level of education than their parents. So like many of them, might have gone to college where their parents had not gone to college. They tend to be competitive, take pride in their accomplishments, and be professionals. Their affluence and spending power, which has been very strong, will decline as sadly they die off, but they are still a major economic, political, and social force. They spend money on leisure travel, healthcare, home improvements, and pets. And then finally, the silent generation. These are, the people that would have maybe been in World War II or just born right during World War II. They are active citizens who vote. They are an important source of donations and volunteers because they have time and money. They lead other groups as consumers of traditional mass media, and some of them are social media users. When we communicate with the silent generation, we want to focus on the value of the product, facts instead of hype, and endorsements from experts, not celebrities. And they do tend to like companies that have excellent customer service. Let's talk about emerging audiences. In my opinion, these audiences are long past emerging. The first one we're going to talk about is women. Women have been in the workforce for over 50 years in professional jobs, had their own money, had buying power. But what your book says is that women are gaining additional power and influence in social and economic life. We're also going to talk about LGBTQIA+. And the book says that they are gaining legal protections and broader social acceptance. I did look up where we stand in the state of Florida, and you can see this quote from Equality Florida, that there is still no statewide law that prohibits discrimination against LGBTQ people in Florida. And then the third emerging audience that we're going to talk about are religious groups. Let's talk about women as an audience. Much of the influence of women comes from their power as consumers and opinion leaders, and it corresponds with their higher levels of education and professional success that they are enjoying today. Women have traditionally been the buyers for household products for children, for example. They are also opinion leaders in the sense that they often have wider networks of friends online or offline that they can share the products that they love with, or the ideas that they're thinking about with. Your book does a good job of talking about the ideas of womanhood throughout the years. They include traditional homemaker, then women moving into working outside the home, and then now once we got outside the home, we wanted that work-life balance. Women are influencing culture and society. They talk about Rihanna in your book, challenging ideas of gender, embracing different ideas about feminism and what it means to be a woman, and then also expressing ethnic diversity. So I was thinking about campaigns that do a really good job of targeting women. And this one, you may have seen this before, Like a Girl, and it's for Always, the feminine products. And they asked young girls to show or to demonstrate what it looked like to run like a girl or throw a ball like a girl, and how they changed their perception over the time of this project. So it's a great video to watch if you haven't seen it before. And it just kind of made me think. I just also saw a segment today about a product called August that's also in the feminine products category. And they talked about the taxation on sanitary products for women. I pulled this little where they're asking for donations to try to fight the taxation. So that's something else that may happen in public relations, not just trying to sell products to consumers, but working through our government to try to make changes on things like, is your product something that gets taxed? Let's talk about LGBTQIA plus as an audience. So your book says that businesses have taken note of the relative affluence of the gay community. Again, this is not a new thing, but your book makes it seem a little bit like it's a little bit more new than it really is. There's a greater purchasing power in this group, and it's often paired with high brand loyalty to companies that are in line with their values. And companies that demonstrate support for LGBTQIA plus issues can use these campaigns, their PR campaigns, to express their values and reinforce their image. And so PR professionals should research identities of members of different audience segments to ensure that the messages do not conflict with their values or paint a stereotypical reflection of the community. And it is important to note with all these audiences that we are talking about is that you can't just send a message and, this will work for the entire LGBTQIA plus community. You have to segment all of these communities that I'm going to talk about as well. I pulled this campaign from Starbucks. It was both an ad and PR campaign, and they talked about transgender people and going into Starbucks and being able to say what your name is and having them write it, that they can write your new name on a cup, and that maybe people feel that maybe that's for the first time that they've ever said their new name, their adopted name. And so they just did a really good job with that campaign. Starbucks usually does. Let's talk about religious groups as an audience. And so understanding religious groups helps to connect with those different audiences, but it also provides a lot of insights on the political scene because religion's often tied to politics. We can also think about demographic shifts in the population in terms of religion, and then the influence of religion on society. So the study found that there is a trend toward a more secular society in the United States, where we have 24% of people who said in this survey that they are atheist, agnostic, or no religion in particular. And again, more from this study. It was the Public Religion Institute survey that they did of 100,000 U.S. residents. They found that almost 70% of the people that they surveyed were Christian. If you're curious, the book breaks down the Christianity faith into many different segments based on race and the denomination of Christianity. That Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist religions are just about 6% combined. So religious affiliation and political views are very important to public relations professionals who work for political candidates or lawmakers or political parties. And religious groups will lobby Congress for various causes that are important to them. Continuing on religious groups as an audience, they do often have common characteristics that are related to household wealth, higher education, important social issues, and demand for consumer goods or services. Again, not everybody who is in a certain religious faith is going to be exactly the same, but you may find some common characteristics. Your book talks about that advertisers and marketers are definitely paying attention to religious segments. And so the market for halal certified food products that are eaten by Muslim people is a $13 billion industry in the United States, so it's not something you would want to ignore. McDonald's and Whole Foods are definitely on the scene, regularly offering these foods. And the market for halal certified beauty products and modest clothing is also attracting major brands like Nike, which introduced this Nike Pro hijab garment for athletes. So how do you connect with ethnically and racially diverse audiences? I want to say here that your book tends to just use the term ethnicity and not race, but they are two different things. And so I'll point that out here in a minute. But you must understand how the cultural background influences a person's self-identity, values, habits, lifestyles, and perceptions. And ethnic and racial populations form many different target audiences, and they are not massive homogeneous groups. And so that is a point I'm going to say over and over, that if you want to look at Hispanic people in the United States, you know they are not all the same. African American or Black Americans are not all the same. Christians are not all the same. Women are not all the same. LGBTQIA plus members are not all the same. But we must understand the diversity within the audience and the extent to which the various segments differ from one another. I just threw this in so you could understand how our country is expected to change in the next almost 40 years. And so that first bar is 2020. The second bar is projected for 2060. And the blue bar that you see is the difference. And so you can see the first set of bars is white Americans, and you can see the population declining, where the population for every other group listed here that I can read, Hispanic Americans, Black or African Americans, Asian Americans, and people who are two or more races are all expected to increase during the next almost 40 years. Let's start by talking about Hispanic and Latinx audiences. The size of the audience, it's a big audience in the United States, represents a lot of opportunities and challenges for public relations practitioners. As I just mentioned, it is the largest ethnic market in the United States. It's valued at $1.5 trillion. There's also a rapid growth of the Hispanic population in the United States. And so effective campaigns targeting this audience would mingle Spanish language or cultural traditions with American culture. We want to keep in mind that all Hispanic or Latinx people in the United States are not all Spanish speakers. Some are bilingual, some are English dominant, and some are Spanish dominant. Many of them identify with their country of origin and not as Hispanic. So that's important to remember. There is a difference between Hispanic and Latinx refers to people from Latin America, or Hispanic could refer to people from Spain, for example. But as I just mentioned, I think most people would say I'm Dominican, or I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Brazilian, and not as Hispanic or Latinx. So merely translating a message that you want to send from English to Spanish is not enough to ensure that the message reaches and is accepted by a Hispanic or Spanish-speaking audience. There are some common values that we can think about with this audience: an increasing importance on education, household incomes increasing, which means there will be more consumer spending, an emphasis on children and family, and brand loyalty. I pulled this tweet from Barbie that's getting a lot of press coverage right now. They posted this back in September to promote the movie. They talk about families celebrating the Mexican Festival of Remembrance by paying respects to the memories of their loved ones, and how they're introducing these Barbie and Ken dolls. Asian American audiences. This is the fastest growing group in the United States, and like many other audiences we're talking about, it's very diverse. The buying power of this group is on the rise. They have a longer life expectancy than non-Hispanic whites, and so that means they live longer and can be consumers for longer. The values that are placed on Asian Americans, which are typically or stereotypically education, hard work, career, vary widely, but studies have shown that Asian Americans value culturally relevant content. They have strong family relationships and like cooking or eating food from their country or origin. So you should also consider the trends that are happening in Asia. or their in particular their country of origin when you are targeting an Asian American group for messaging. Let's talk about African American audiences. And I have this here in quotes like your book does. African Americans are the second largest racial group in the United States, hardly a monolithic group, so very different. And why your book puts this in quotes is they talk about while the terms Black and African American are used interchangeably, the latter term can be particularly misleading, and certain people may not identify as being from Africa. They might say, I'm a Haitian American, or would prefer to just use the term Black. This audience is diverse in terms of its buying power and wealth. College attendance has increased. Black populations have declined in major urban areas. We used to often say, like, we want to target the urban market, and what we meant was the Black market. And we kind of have moved away from that term. Your book talks about urban just being like more hip hop, but it doesn't just mean this is the Black market. And so don't equate urban with Black. Black media is a powerful channel for reaching this audience, and Black influencers are often a great way to, on social media, a great way to target this audience. I pulled up, for example, some Black media. You can see this big fat Black media calendar for 22. I can see magazines on here like Black Entrepreneur and Essence, and then NBC even has a branch of NBC that's targeted to Black consumers. Members of ethnic groups are significant niche audiences for ethnic media. Let me make a few points about ethnic media. It tends to be more popular with recent immigrants than more established or younger members of potential audiences. The media consists of both local independent outlets and also affiliates of international networks owned by media conglomerates. And then media consumption among all ethnic groups is influenced by their use of new technologies. And so if they are spending a lot of time on social media, they are not spending as much time on traditional ethnic media. The targeted media outlets may soon aim at smaller ethnic communities as well. That way they can be more targeted and provide content that's more of interest, as well as second or third generation consumers and also some mixed language households. We want to match the media that we choose for our messaging with the audience. We want to think about the age, race, income, education factors when we are choosing that media, and then also knowing the advantages and disadvantages and current trends with each form of media is essential. Let's talk about print media. Print media remains popular among older and highly educated audiences. You might think about your parents or grandparents that subscribe to a newspaper or a magazine, and you don't. It's most effective for delivering messages where audiences must absorb and consider detail. It's a lot easier to learn something or absorb content when you're reading it than listening to something on television. It can be read repeatedly, kept for reference. Newspapers are better at in-depth material than television. Television just doesn't have the time, and it's just not the right format for an in-depth discussion. They are also designed to have a wide appeal to a wide group of people, and it tends to be more time sensitive. So if you want a quick message to go out, a newspaper is better than a magazine, which I'm going to talk about next. Magazines deal in greater depth than newspapers. Generally, stories can be longer in magazines than newspapers. They focus on a specific subject. They are better at reaching a special interest audience because they do focus on a specific subject, and they're less time sensitive than newspapers. And so their deadlines are a lot further out than a newspaper. Print media are migrating to digital platforms, as I'm sure you're quite aware. And the pandemic actually caused a rise in spending on print media where people were subscribing more, and it actually may have saved some newspapers that were in danger of going under. Next is radio and audio. Radio and audio, such as podcasts, lack the visual impact of television, but they tend to be more intimate than print. They can reach a mass audience or a specific target audience. Pre-pandemic, actually 90% of U.S. residents were reached weekly through radio and audio, which seems crazy to me, but that's the stat that's in your book. And 1/3 of listeners are Black or Hispanic. Radio and audio are well suited for public service announcements. We can do live webcasts or podcasts, and the growth of smartphones is correlated with not only podcast listening, but radio listening as well. I posted a graphic of one of my favorite business-related podcasts here, how I built this, so I'm just giving it a plug right here. Radio and audio are also convenient. You can prepare your message more quickly than for radio or audio than for television, and it's really good for emergencies. Next, television and video. They have the strongest emotional impact, more vivid and engaging. I'm sure you've watched something before, a little clip, a reel, something that made you cry, and television and video can definitely do this. The personality of the television communicator can have a persuasive cultural impact. So whoever the host is can definitely impact other people. It offers opportunities for PR professionals to reach large audiences through earned media. So you all are learning about how public relations practitioners push stories through the media, and that's called earned media, and they can reach a wide audience through television. There has been an increase in viewership for evening news that has occurred during and since the pandemic. However, the popularity of traditional television viewing is declining. As you know, that people are moving over to streaming services and maybe just watching YouTube. But as I mentioned, streaming video does capture a large, broad audience and is likely to surpass cable in coming years. YouTube, you can have personalized video content. Your organization can have their own channel where they post content, as you know. And distribution of video content through social media is very cost effective and allows for a direct interaction with the target audience where they can comment on your video, which is something that you can't have. Finally, online and social media. These tools are vital for public relations professionals. All forms of digital media that we distribute over the internet or cell phone networks have become more popular. I just have a couple of dates in here for you just for fun, that a BlackBerry came out in the early 90s and the iPhone came out in 2007. Social media allows for two-way communication with a mass audience. So that is something that is of interest to public relations professionals. We can bypass traditional media gatekeepers. So we don't have to do our media relations with social and online media. We don't have to pitch reporters. We just put the story out there ourselves. The value of social and online media lies in generating authentic dialogue. A few other points. Multicultural audiences are enthusiastic, voracious consumers of social media. And the use of social media, no surprise, is increasing at a steady and consistent rate across all ethnic groups. Asian Americans are the heaviest users. We find similar usage patterns, but differences in preferred channels. So people from different backgrounds might prefer different channels. We know people from different age groups prefer different channels. And Facebook audience insights can really be helpful in tracking current trends in media consumption by different market segments. That concludes our presentation about reaching diverse audiences.